The skyline of Dubai shimmered like liquid gold against the desert night. Glass towers pierced the sky, their reflections stretching across the Arabian Gulf, while luxury yachts traced glittering paths along the marina. From above, it looked like perfection, a city where wealth had conquered the impossible. But perfection has cracks, and sometimes those cracks are only visible when you're trapped in the sky with no way out. At 10:15 p.m., a private jet lifted from Al Maktoum International Airport. Unlike the crowded cabins of commercial airlines, this was a flying palace. Polished mahogany panels, Italian leather seats, crystal glasses waiting for champagne. A sanctuary for the powerful, where the rules of ordinary life never applied. But that night, the sanctuary would transform into a crime scene. On board were just three souls: His Excellency Sheikh Khaled Al Fahim, one of Dubai's most influential businessmen, his elegant wife Leila, and the woman who had been his secret for nearly a year, flight attendant Alina Petrova. The world saw the Sheikh as a man of impeccable faith, wealth, and power. His wife was admired for her grace, charity work, and devotion to family. Alina was invisible to most, just another face in the crowd of attendants serving the elite. But hidden behind the polished veneers were secrets so volatile they would detonate before the plane touched down. The cameras at the airport captured nothing unusual. The Sheikh carried himself with effortless authority. His wife, in a flowing abaya, remained poised, unreadable. Alina walked a few steps behind, her eyes betraying tension, her hand brushing the strap of a handbag that contained messages, photos, and promises, the kind of evidence that could dismantle dynasties. As the jet climbed into the night sky, the city lights shrank below them. But inside the cabin, the air grew heavier with every passing minute. What began as small talk over dinner service would soon spiral into accusations, betrayals, and a confrontation that had only one possible ending. Because this wasn't just a flight, it was a collision course between love, power, and honor. And before the jet returned to Earth, one of its passengers would never breathe again. To the outside world, Sheikh Khaled Al Fahim was the very definition of Dubai's success story. At 52, he was a man who seemed to have conquered every domain: business, politics, family, faith. His name adorned luxury developments across the Emirates, from glass towers in Dubai Marina to exclusive resorts on man-made islands. His wealth was not merely counted in billions, but in influence. He was the kind of man whose phone call could change the course of a business empire or decide the fate of a family. In public, he was almost untouchable. Photographed often in crisp white kandjara, gold cufflinks glinting at his wrists, Sheikh Khaled cultivated an image of discipline and devotion. He funded mosques across the UAE, endowed hospitals, and poured millions into scholarships for underprivileged students. In Friday prayers, he was seen standing shoulder to shoulder with ordinary worshippers, a gesture that made headlines about his humility and connection to tradition. To his peers, he was not just a businessman, but a moral leader. To his people, he represented stability, continuity, and success. But behind the carefully polished facade lay another man entirely. Those closest to him, his inner circle of advisors, his household staff, his pilots, and the women who had crossed his path, knew a truth the cameras never captured. Sheikh Khaled was a man of appetites. Power had not humbled him, it had emboldened him. And when you believe yourself above consequence, indulgence becomes second nature. His private life told a different story. The Sheikh's marriage to Leila, arranged when he was barely 25, had been celebrated as one of Dubai's most powerful unions. She came from an equally wealthy family, admired for her refinement and charitable work. Together, they projected the image of a perfect couple. Yet, insiders whispered of his affairs, beautiful women drawn from the worlds of fashion, aviation, and hospitality. Flight attendants, models, even married women from high society. Some relationships lasted weeks, others months. All ended the same way: silence purchased with gifts, contracts, or threats. For years, this duality remained safely hidden. The Sheikh moved between his two worlds with surgical precision. By day, the philanthropist. By night, the man chasing forbidden desires. Leila, dignified and intelligent, played her role flawlessly. Whether she knew or merely suspected, she never let doubt show in public. In Dubai's elite circles, appearances mattered more than truth. To question her husband openly would mean questioning the dynasty itself. But Khaled's affair with Alina Petrova was different. Unlike fleeting encounters with women who accepted their roles as temporary distractions, Alina pushed boundaries. She was young, ambitious, and dangerously aware of the leverage she held. For nearly a year, she collected evidence, photographs of their meetings, messages promising a future, records of lavish gifts. And unlike others before her, she wasn't satisfied with being kept in the shadows. This affair, unlike the others, was not contained. It carried risk, because it had moved from the Sheikh's private indulgence into his wife's orbit. And Leila was no ordinary wife. She was a woman of power in her own right, respected in government and philanthropic circles. Betrayal was one thing, public humiliation was another. And humiliation was something Sheikh Khaled could never allow. The irony was bitter. For decades, he had balanced his two lives with careful precision, avoiding scandal despite countless indiscretions. But one miscalculation, trusting Alina with more access, more promises, more proximity, had destabilized everything. What began as indulgence had evolved into danger. The duality of Sheikh Khaled al-Fahim was now on the verge of collapse. The philanthropist who built hospitals and mosques, the devout man who spoke of faith and discipline, and the predator who believed wealth and power entitled him to women, secrecy, and silence. On the ground, his image remained intact, but in the skies, aboard his private jet, the masks would fall away. And when truth collided with power at 30,000 feet, indulgence would transform into violence, and a secret affair would end in blood. At first glance, Alina Petrova's story looked like one of triumph. Born in Sofia, Bulgaria, she had grown up in a modest two-room apartment, the eldest daughter of a schoolteacher and a factory worker. Her parents instilled discipline, resilience, and the dream that education might open doors beyond the crumbling concrete blocks of her neighborhood. But opportunity was scarce, and by the time Alina finished secondary school, it was clear that her family's future depended less on academics and more on sacrifice. She was striking, with the kind of beauty that seemed to draw light toward her. Tall, poised, and fluent in 3 languages, Alina carried herself with a confidence beyond her years. At 19, she enrolled in a hospitality program determined to escape the financial struggles that had defined her childhood. When Emirates Airlines announced open recruitment in Sofia, she seized the chance. Thousands applied, only a fraction were chosen. When Alina received her acceptance letter, her family wept with pride. Dubai transformed her life overnight. The city was a glittering promise of wealth and freedom, and for a while she believed she had found her paradise. She shared an apartment with other attendants near Jumeirah, spent layovers in Paris, New York, and Singapore, and sent money home each month to support her parents and younger brother. The uniform, with its signature red hat and immaculate scarf, became her armor and her passport into a world she had once only seen in magazines. It was during one of those assignments that she first encountered Sheikh Khaled al-Fahim. The private charters for VVIP clients were the most demanding flights, long hours, endless discretion, and the unspoken rule. What happened on board stayed on board. Khaled noticed her immediately. Unlike the other attendants, Alina was attentive without being deferential, professional yet engaging. She could discuss politics, literature, and art with surprising depth. For a man accustomed to being flattered, her intelligence was intoxicating. The courtship was subtle at first. A smile held 2 long, casual questions about her background, small tokens of appreciation. But once the Sheikh decided she was his, the gestures became bolder. A Bulgari bracelet left discreetly in her purse after a flight. Invitations to dinners in Rome and Istanbul under the guise of business trips. A private apartment in Dubai Marina, the rent quietly covered by his office. For Alina, the affair was more than indulgence. She convinced herself it was destiny, that their bond transcended the lines between servant and master, rich and poor. Each time he whispered promises of a future together, her hope deepened. She dreamed of stability, of finally escaping the precarious life of contracts and layovers, of becoming part of a world where nothing was out of reach. But those promises came with chains. As months passed, Khaled's generosity turned into control. He demanded exclusivity, monitored her movements, and required constant reassurance of her loyalty. What had begun as intoxicating romance shifted into dependency. She lived in an apartment she did not own, wore clothes she had not bought, and depended on allowances she could not replace. Still, Alina clung to his words. "Be patient," he told her again and again. "When the time is right, I will make everything official." She held onto those words like scripture, even as doubts crept in. She noticed the way his phone calls ended abruptly when his wife entered the room, the way his tone shifted from warmth to command, the way weeks sometimes passed without contact. And then came the turning point, the discovery that she was not his first secret. Through whispers from other attendants and fragments of gossip, Alina learned of women before her, each promised a future, each discarded quietly with gifts and contracts to ensure silence. Unlike them, however, Alina had something more: evidence. Photos, texts, and recordings, carefully preserved insurance against abandonment. In her mind, it wasn't blackmail. It was protection. Proof that she mattered, that she had not imagined the promises he made. But in the eyes of a man like Sheikh Khaled, it was the most dangerous act of all. By the time she realized the depth of the storm she had walked into, it was too late. What began as a dream of freedom had become a trap at 30,000 feet, a trap that would cost her everything. If Sheikh Khaled Al-Fahim was the symbol of wealth and power, his wife, Leila, was the embodiment of elegance. Born into an old Emirati family with political connections stretching back generations, Leila had been raised to understand her role long before she married. From the moment their union was arranged in her early 20s, she was expected to be more than a wife. She was to be the guardian of tradition, the curator of appearances, and the protector of the Al-Fahim dynasty's reputation. Leila played her part flawlessly. To the public, she was admired for her grace and refinement. Photographed at charity galas, honored by ministries for her work with orphanages, her image was immaculate. She wore couture with understated dignity, spoke softly but carried weight in philanthropic circles, and maintained her household with military precision. If her husband was the empire's architect, she was its foundation, silent, steady, unshakable. But behind the flowing abayas and carefully curated smiles, Leila lived a life of quiet humiliation. From the early years of her marriage, whispers of Khaled's indiscretions had reached her. Hotel staff, private drivers, even other wives at social gatherings hinted at the Sheikh's taste for women beyond the marriage bed. Leila never asked, and Khaled never confessed. Theirs was a pact written not in words, but in necessity. He could indulge, but she would never allow scandal to stain their name. For decades, this arrangement held. She endured the loneliness, the subtle betrayals, the knowledge that her husband's faithfulness was an illusion. In return, she preserved her children's futures, her family's honor, and her place as matriarch of one of Dubai's most powerful clans. To confront him openly would mean not only personal disgrace, but societal collapse. In the world she inhabited, silence was survival. But Alina Petrova was different. This was not a fleeting indulgence, hidden carefully in the shadows. This was a young woman who carried herself with confidence, who flaunted expensive gifts, who appeared in places where Leila's friends had begun to notice her presence. Leila did not need to search. The evidence came to her. A driver whispered of late-night rendezvous. A housemaid mentioned clothing left behind in Khaled's private quarters. And finally, through a discreet contact at Emirates Airlines, Leila obtained the proof that shattered the delicate balance she had maintained for decades. Photographs of her husband with the flight attendant. Intimate, undeniable, time-stamped on trips she had been told were business. For days, Leila carried the images locked in her phone, staring at them in silence during long nights when sleep would not come. The humiliation burned, not just as a wife betrayed, but as a woman stripped of dignity in the eyes of the society she had devoted her life to impressing. Beneath the calm exterior, her heart raged. Against him, against the girl, against the hypocrisy that demanded she endure while he indulged without consequence. Her conflict was relentless. One part of her longed for revenge, for exposure, for the world to see the Sheikh as he truly was. Another part reminded her of duty, of the fragile balance that held their dynasty together. If she spoke, if she acted rashly, the scandal would consume them all. Their children would be tainted, their family name dragged through mud, and she would be remembered not as a dignified matriarch, but as the woman who brought everything crashing down. In the end, Leila chose neither silence nor open confrontation. She chose something more dangerous: to confront her husband in private, to force him to reckon with her knowledge, to remind him that she was not just a decorative figure in his empire, but a woman capable of wielding power in her own way. The night she stepped onto the private jet alongside her husband and Alina Petrova, Leila carried more than elegance and poise. She carried the weight of betrayal, the fury of humiliation, and the dangerous resolve of a woman who had nothing left to lose. What unfolded in the skies above the Gulf would not be a simple love triangle. It would be the collision of pride, betrayal, and vengeance, where silence was no longer an option, and survival itself was at stake. By the start of 2017, what had begun as an intoxicating affair had transformed into a slow-burning crisis. Alina Petrova, once content with secret meetings and whispered promises, began demanding more. She was no longer the wide-eyed flight attendant dazzled by gifts and luxury. She wanted acknowledgement. She wanted legitimacy. And most dangerously of all, she wanted a future that included marriage. At first, her demands were framed as gentle questions during their rendezvous. When will you tell her? When will we no longer have to hide? But as the months dragged on and the Sheikh continued to stall, her questions sharpened into ultimatums. You told me 6 months, she reminded him, holding up the Cartier bracelet he had clasped around her wrist. You told me July. It's almost March. How long do you expect me to live like this? For Sheikh Khaled, every word felt like a tightening noose. He had spent his entire life believing his wealth and power placed him above consequence. But Alina was proving different from the women before her. She had collected evidence, screenshots, photographs, receipts. She had the kind of leverage that could not simply be bought off with jewelry or silenced with contracts. For the first time in decades, the Sheikh was not in control. And behind the polished walls of the Al Fahim compound, Leila was no longer blind. For years, she had endured his indiscretions in silence, protecting the image of their marriage with dignified restraint. But Alina's presence was impossible to ignore. Friends whispered, staff slipped, and the photographs she had acquired through discreet channels told the story in merciless detail. Her husband, the man who lectured about faith and family values, entangled in the arms of a foreigner young enough to be his daughter. The betrayal burned, but for Leila the humiliation was worse. It was one thing to be a wife in private agony. It was another to be a matriarch mocked behind closed doors, pitied by the same society that once admired her grace. Her decision crystallized with chilling clarity. This was no longer about forgiveness or even endurance. This was about survival, hers, her children's, and the family's honor. The Sheikh thought he could manage both women. To Alina he promised patience, urging her to wait just a little longer. These things take time, he insisted. There are business interests, family ties. I must protect you from scandal. To Leila, he maintained a facade of control, pretending that the rumors were exaggerated, that she was imagining things. But beneath his calm exterior, he was unraveling. The breaking point came when Alina pressed for what she called the truth. She wanted not only acknowledgement but recognition. She wanted Leila to know she existed. To her, it was proof that she was not a temporary distraction. To him, it was the ultimate threat. Exposure meant more than humiliation. It meant collapse. Business partners would distance themselves, political allies would vanish, and the dynasty he had spent decades building could crumble overnight. Leila, for her part, no longer waited for confessions. She decided to set the stage herself. When Khaled announced a short business flight to Europe, she insisted on accompanying him. At first, he tried to dissuade her, excuses about meetings, confidentiality, tight schedules, but Leila was immovable. I am your wife, she told him calmly. If there is business, I will be there. The trap was sprung before the jet even left the ground. Alina was already scheduled to staff the flight. Whether by coincidence or cruel design, all three of them, the Sheikh, the mistress, and the wife, would share a sealed cabin for 7 unbroken hours. The night of departure, tension crackled like static electricity. At Al Maktoum International Airport, cameras captured the trio boarding. The Sheikh walked ahead, his expression tight, his gait purposeful. Leila followed with serene composure, her abaya flowing, her eyes unreadable. And behind them, Alina in her crisp uniform, her hands trembling as she adjusted her scarf. From the outside, it looked like any other private flight. But once the doors closed and the jet lifted into the night sky, reality set in. 40,000 feet above the ground, there would be no distractions, no escape routes, no polite distance to soften the blows. Dinner service was polite but strained. Alina moved mechanically, pouring champagne into crystal flutes, her eyes darting between husband and wife. Leila, calm as glass, asked about the children, the household, trivial matters that only highlighted the unspoken tension. Khaled tried to maintain composure, but sweat glistened at his temples. The triangle was no longer hidden in whispers and shadows. It was seated around a single table, locked inside a flying palace hurtling through the night. The question was no longer if the truth would erupt, but when. And when it did, there would be no turning back. From the outside, the private jet looked like the pinnacle of luxury, an airborne palace built for the powerful. Inside, soft leather seats gleamed under golden light. Crystal glasses sat ready for champagne. Every surface spoke of wealth, comfort, and absolute control. But that night, as the engines roared through the skies above the Arabian Gulf, the polished cabin became a pressure cooker where betrayal, rage, and fear collided. For the first hour, civility held. Alina moved through the aisles with professional detachment, offering champagne, adjusting trays, her uniform immaculate though her hands trembled. Leila sat composed, her abaya falling gracefully across her lap, her face an unreadable mask. Sheikh Khaled pretended at calm, discussing business matters that no one was really listening to. Beneath the surface, every glance, every pause in conversation carried the weight of unspoken truth. It was Leila who broke the silence. Her voice was steady, each word deliberate. "How long were you planning to continue this charade, Khaled?" The question landed like a strike. Alina froze mid-step, eyes darting between husband and wife. Khaled's jaw tightened. He muttered about misunderstandings, rumors exaggerated by jealous staff, but Leila had come prepared. From her handbag, she produced photographs, grainy, time-stamped, undeniable, her husband with Alina in Rome, Istanbul, and Dubai. The perfect image of betrayal. Khaled's mask cracked. His tone shifted from dismissal to anger, accusing Leila of spying, of endangering the family's reputation. But before he could reassert control, Alina spoke. Her voice shook, but her words cut clean. She confessed everything, the promises he had made, the future he had painted, the evidence she had kept. Texts, recordings, photographs. "If you leave me with nothing," she warned, "the world will know who you really are." The air in the cabin turned electric. For Leila, humiliation transformed into fury. She turned on Alina, her words venomous. "You think you're special? You're just another distraction. Do you even know what kind of man you've given yourself to?" Years of suppressed rage poured out in one searing monologue, her dignity stripped by the sight of her husband's mistress standing bold in the same space. Khaled snapped. For decades, he had controlled every narrative, silenced every scandal. But now, trapped at 40,000 feet, two women threatened to unravel everything he had built. His voice rose, first with authority, then with desperation. He shouted about honor, reputation, power, concepts that meant nothing to the women who had already seen the man behind the mask. The argument escalated into chaos. Alina stood her ground, clutching her phone, the device that held her leverage. Leila lunged, trying to tear it from her hands, her composure replaced by raw fury. Khaled shoved himself between them, but the confined space only fueled the violence. Glass shattered, champagne spilled across the carpet, the pristine order of the jet dissolving into disorder. And then came the moment no one could take back. Khaled's hands, once adorned with gold rings that symbolized power, closed around Alina's wrists. He demanded the phone, demanded silence. She resisted, screaming words that echoed off the leather walls. "The world will know." The struggle turned brutal. In the narrow aisle, with Leila shouting, Khaled's strength overwhelmed her. A shove, a blow, a desperate attempt to end the confrontation spiraled into something irreversible. When silence finally fell, the luxury jet was no longer a sanctuary. It was a crime scene at 40,000 feet. The leather seats were stained. Shards of glass glittered like sharp confessions across the floor. And in the center of it all stood Sheikh Khaled, sweating, trembling, his mask gone, his empire teetering, while Leila stared at him with horror and recognition. Because in that moment she realized the truth she had always suspected. Her husband was not just unfaithful, he was dangerous, and now there was no turning back. The jet had been cruising at 40,000 feet for just over 2 hours when the final mask slipped. The shouting began low, sharp exchanges between husband and wife, but quickly escalated into open chaos. The confined cabin, meant to exude calm luxury, vibrated with rage. Leila's voice, usually measured and dignified, rose to a pitch edged with fury. She hurled accusations like daggers, each one cutting deeper than the last. Khaled, sweating and red-faced, barked back with the tone of a man accustomed to obedience, not defiance. And between them, Alina trembled but did not retreat. She clutched her phone like a weapon, the device that carried every promise, every betrayal, every secret she had saved. "You told me I was your future," she screamed, her accent thickening with emotion. "Now you want to erase me, to throw me away like the others, not this time." Khaled's composure shattered. He lunged, trying to snatch the phone from her hands. Alina twisted away, her back hitting the polished mahogany paneling with a thud. The jet's engines hummed steadily beneath the violence, the surreal backdrop to a drama that would never see the ground. Leila stepped forward, her abaya sweeping across the aisle. "Enough," she hissed, her eyes blazing with humiliation and wrath locked on Alina. "You dare threaten my family, my children's name?" She raised a manicured hand and struck the young woman across the face. The crack echoed through the cabin, shocking even Khaled into momentary stillness. Alina staggered but did not fall. She screamed again, this time at both of them. "The world will know what you are." Her voice was shrill, desperate, carrying the weight of everything she had endured, the broken promises, the manipulation, the months of silence. That was the trigger. Khaled lunged again, this time with brute force. His hands clamped around Alina's wrists, his grip iron. She fought, nails raking his skin, kicking against the narrow aisle. Leila joined in, clawing for the phone, her rage fueling the assault. In the frenzy, champagne glasses toppled, shattering into glittering fragments across the carpet. A crystal decanter rolled, spilling amber liquid that soaked into the leather seats like spilled blood. The struggle became primal, three bodies tangled in a storm of violence, betrayal, and fear. Alina's screams broke into gasps, then sobs. A sharp blow landed across her temple, whether by Khaled's hand or Leila's was never clear. Her knees buckled and she collapsed onto the floor. The cabin fell into eerie silence. Only the roar of the engines remained, steady and indifferent to the chaos inside. Alina lay crumpled against the aisle, her cheek pressed against the plush carpet now stained with blood. Her chest heaved once, twice, then fell still. Leila straightened, her breathing ragged, her face flushed with exertion. She looked down at the lifeless young woman with cold detachment. "It had to be done," she whispered, as though convincing herself as much as her husband. She would have destroyed everything. Khaled stumbled backward, his chest heaving, sweat dripping from his temples. His eyes darted between Alina's motionless body and his wife's unyielding stare. For the first time in years, the Sheikh looked powerless, cornered by the consequences of his own indulgence. This wasn't supposed to happen," he muttered, his voice shaking. His hands, still trembling from the struggle, bore fresh scratches where Alina had fought for her life. He stared at them as if seeing blood for the first time. Leila's tone hardened. "We protect the family, we protect the name. No one can ever know what happened here." The words settled like a verdict. Khaled nodded slowly, the weight of guilt pressing on his shoulders even as fear sharpened his thoughts. He was no longer thinking as a husband or even as a man. He was thinking as a sheikh, a dynasty's guardian. Coverup was survival. Exposure meant ruin. Together they moved mechanically, almost clinically. Leila retrieved the phone, wiping her fingerprints with a napkin before slipping it into her handbag. Khaled adjusted his kandjara, straightened his cufflinks, forced his breathing to steady. They placed Alina's body on the rear couch of the cabin, draping a blanket over her as if she were merely sleeping through turbulence. The luxury jet continued its silent course across the Arabian skies. Outside, the stars glittered coldly, indifferent to the drama playing out within. Inside, the cabin reeked of spilt alcohol, broken glass, and the unspoken pact between husband and wife. A pact sealed not in love or loyalty, but in blood. The cabin was silent now, except for the steady drone of the jet's engines. Alina Petrova's body lay still on the rear divan, her face half covered by a cream-colored blanket. What had begun as a confrontation of words had ended in irreversible violence. But for Sheikh Khaled and his wife Leila, the nightmare had only just begun. At 40,000 feet, there was no room for panic. The luxury jet was not just a crime scene, it was a trap. In a matter of hours, they would land, and every detail would be under scrutiny. If they faltered, if they allowed even the smallest crack in their version of events, everything they had built, wealth, reputation, dynasty, would collapse. Leila moved first. Years of managing households, staff, and appearances had prepared her for moments like this. Her voice was cold, steady, commanding. "This never happened," she said flatly. "From this moment it was an accident, nothing more." Khaled, still shaking, nodded wordlessly. Together they began staging the scene. Broken glass was swept into linen napkins and stuffed into waste bins. The spilt champagne was blotted from the carpet until only faint stains remained. Alina's uniform was adjusted, her hair smoothed down as if she had simply collapsed mid-duty. Her phone, once her lifeline, her leverage, was stripped of evidence, its SIM card crushed beneath Khaled's heel before the device was tucked neatly into her handbag. By the time the pilots were summoned from the cockpit, the script was ready. Alina had suffered a sudden collapse during service. She had complained of dizziness, then fainted. The Sheikh and his wife had tried to revive her, but nothing worked. There was no violence, no confrontation, no truth, just a tragic, unforeseeable medical emergency. The pilots were uneasy but compliant. They had flown for Khaled long enough to know what loyalty meant and what betrayal cost. The captain radioed ahead to the control tower, requesting a medical team to meet them on the tarmac. His tone was steady, but his eyes betrayed the unease of a man trapped in a story he could never repeat. As the jet descended toward Dubai, Leila rehearsed the details in her mind. Alina would be declared dead on arrival, her body whisked away under the authority of Khaled's personal physicians. There would be no autopsy. The family's influence would ensure that. The official report would read sudden cardiac arrest. No one would question further. Not in this city, not with this family. On the ground, everything unfolded with clockwork precision. Medical staff boarded the jet, only to find a lifeless flight attendant beneath a carefully arranged blanket. The Sheikh's personal doctor took control immediately, signing preliminary documents that ruled out foul play. Police officers, stationed routinely at the airport, were instructed to stand down. Within an hour, Alina's body was transferred quietly to a private facility, far from the prying eyes of hospital morgues. The press release was issued before dawn. Emirates Airlines deeply regrets to announce the sudden passing of flight attendant Alina Petrova, 28, due to a medical emergency during a private charter flight. She was a valued member of the team and will be remembered fondly by colleagues and passengers alike. Obituaries in Sofia described her as a rising star who had died tragically young, honored by her employer and mourned by her family. There was no mention of the Sheikh, no mention of Leila, no hint of the brutal reality that had unfolded in the skies. Money flowed quietly to Alina's family in Bulgaria, presented as compensation, framed as a gesture of goodwill. But with it came conditions. No questions, no legal demands, no public statements. Silence purchased, grief contained. By the time dawn broke over Dubai, the cover-up was complete. The jet had been cleaned, the staff silenced, the media narrative secured. On the surface, nothing remained but a tragic accident. But behind the polished doors of the Al Fahim compound, husband and wife carried a shared burden. They had killed together, and together they had buried the truth. The engines of the private jet still echoed in Khaled's ears long after landing. It was the sound of survival, but also of damnation. For the rest of his life, every roar of a plane above the city would remind him of that night, when paradise turned to hell at 30,000 feet. The official story was simple. A young flight attendant collapsed mid-flight, declared dead from sudden cardiac arrest. But inside the airline, whispers began immediately. Crew members who helped clean the cabin spoke of bruises that didn't match a fall, of bloodstains hurriedly scrubbed, of a scene too carefully staged to be an accident. Rumors spread quietly through encrypted WhatsApp groups of cabin crew. Some claimed Alina Petrova had been more than an employee, that she had been the Sheikh's lover. Others insisted his wife, Leila, had discovered the affair mid-flight and violence followed. No one dared speak openly, but the fragments formed a pattern too dangerous to ignore. On social media, anonymous accounts dropped cryptic hints. A royal jet, a woman silenced, a cover-up at 30,000 feet. Posts vanished quickly, deleted under pressure, but screenshots circulated in private expat chats from Dubai to London. The more officials tried to erase the story, the more it spread underground. By the time international media caught wind, the tale was fractured and murky. European tabloids ran sensational headlines about a forbidden affair in the skies. Arabic outlets avoided the subject entirely, blocked by censorship orders. In Sofia, Alina's family mourned their daughter in silence, bewildered by the sudden flow of money from unnamed benefactors. For Dubai's high society, the story became an open secret, a cocktail party whisper, a warning about the dangers of wealth, lust, and betrayal. The official narrative spoke of tragedy. The whispered version spoke of murder. And with every retelling, the legend grew darker. A bride silenced, a sheikh exposed, and a cover-up so polished that only the shadows carried the truth.